Okay, well, first of all, thank you, Lauren, for reaching out and inviting me to speak to this group of colleagues in arms who know what it's like to be trying to raise dollars for an environmental organization in these exciting mid-pandemic days, maybe, and we're not post-pandemic yet. But I'm Dan Blakemore. I'm the philanthropy director here at the Conservancy for Cuyahoga Valley National Park here in Ohio. A former New York City resident for just over 10 years. So I do generally have a feel of where you all are and what's going on there. But I've been in the field now for 15 years. Started in New York. I first started working for a community music school in Manhattan, then moved to an international program and training facility for international graduate students up near Columbia. Then at a historic house museum and botanical gardens here in Ohio, and then came to the national park just over 2 years ago.
Wow.
A few different places, but certainly an interesting career thus far.
For those who weren't able to introduce yourselves, Erica, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I was a little late. I missed it. My name is Erica Kalachi. I'm the Assistant Development Director at the New Jersey Conservation Foundation.
And Nicole.
Hi, everyone. I'm also with the New Jersey Conservation Foundation, along with Erica. I'm their new development associate.
Welcome.
It's Nicole's very first day.
Oh, wow.
Welcome.
Congratulations on the job and welcome to the New Jersey Environmental Fundraisers Gathering. Today we're going to speak with Blake. He has quite the range of very unique and exciting environmental organizations. And it looks like Rochelle's joining us. Rochelle, as we get started, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Rochelle Leboff. I work with Friends of Hopewell Valley Open Space in Hopewell, and I'm the Outreach and Development Manager.
Oh, welcome.
Thank you.
We have Danielle today. Danielle, why don't you kick us off with some of, I don't know, your early years. What was that like?
Oh, the early years. Trying to figure out what in the world I was doing in fundraising is probably the best way to explain it. I first really got into the field coming out of college. I was a political science major and really didn't know what I wanted to do other than I had already worked mostly for free for every level of government and didn't know if that was going to be something exciting to do. I wasn't really moved by, I'm going to be an entry-level staffer and up on Capitol Hill or something. So that really made me look more critically at the nonprofit sector as an option. I ended up going to NYU to get my master's, and while I was there, I did an internship at the Jewish Museum in Manhattan. My first project there was updating board profiles, a very exciting task, as we all know. But at some point I went to my boss and said, okay, well, these 5 trustees are all affiliated with these foundations that are giving us between $50,000 and $100,000. We're getting this money because of our relationship with them. She said, yes, this is a relationship business. Where were you? Oh, clearly in the dark. Okay, well, this makes more sense. Okay, tell me more about this fundraising. After that, I really spent my second year of grad school bothering any fundraiser who would give me 15 minutes for coffee or anything, just to say, you're in special events or you're in major gifts, you're running an annual fund. What does that even look like? What are you doing every day? How does one make this a sustainable career? So I was very fortunate that a decent number of people gave their time and insight to try to explain this exciting world to me. And with all that and getting out of grad school, I got that first job at a community music school, running the annual fund. But of course, because no good deed goes unpunished, the person who had been running our anniversary luncheon for 10 years, literally on a Friday, went home and was going to come in on Monday and quit over the weekend. And I then inherited a 350 person event at a Midtown hotel, having very little event experience. So that was trial by fire, I would say, is the best way to explain that. Because she had been doing it so long, she didn't really keep kind of a written timeline of when things are due, or, oh, this is normally when we call this vendor for this. So a lot of it was my boss coming to me every day like, oh, are the honoree citations done? I said, what citations? I'm in my 3rd month. I haven't been to the event. I don't know what we're talking about. Oh, well, I don't know if she did that. So call the vendor. Call the vendor and they're like, well, yeah, that copy was due like a week ago. Oh, okay, great. Well, how quickly can you produce them if I give you copy in like an hour? I said, oh, is it? We can get it for you, but it'll be a rush. I said, whatever it costs, we need it. So some interesting experiences like that. Also, I was managing a small portfolio of endowment donors who supported the music school settlement. So it was interesting just to kind of start having that one-on-one relationship with people for the couple of years I was there. Primarily around reporting, but also stewardship, even soliciting a couple to make additional gifts to their endowments. So kind of good formative experience, if nothing else, along with throwing me in the deep end where I didn't really know what I was doing. But from there, yeah, I went to a place called International House, which is up near Columbia. Was assistant director of individual giving for almost 7 years, which was a totally different experience. Kind of being not the head of the department, but kind of one of those really helping move things forward. Particularly managing kind of our full individual giving portfolio, whether it's annual fund, capital, scholarship, and planned giving. Interesting, and to be there for long enough to really see some positive, some the program growing, getting more people to actually make their gifts, growing our planned giving group. And I think that was probably the first place where I went through a CEO transition, because the president that hired me retired. Then we got a totally different president with a totally different perspective on everything. So learning how to write in the voice after you've gotten used to writing in one person's voice, having to totally change what that voice is, was an interesting experience. I could say, well, like, well, Don would say it this way. How's Calvin going to say it? Well, I don't know. Write a draft and see what he thinks. Okay, well, I hope he's kind with his red pen. But I think great work, really a great team. And by that point, by the time I left, it was really more because we had had our first child. And as you may not be aware, New York City is a slightly expensive place. And I'm originally from Northeast Ohio, and my wife's from Northwestern Pennsylvania. So I said, we don't play the lottery, so we're not going to win. Either I don't even if I get a new job, it's not likely to find something where I'm making double, where we still want to have the first kid and still, we don't know, we want at least 2. Like, we may need to consider going back home, where our money will at least go farther than it did in New York City. So I was able to somehow convince my wife to leave New York City. But no, and I was moving to the Historic House Museum. While I was still at iHouse, I got my CFRE, because I knew I wanted to have a career in fundraising, and more positions, manager or not, really have started to include kind of the CFRE preferred. So I said, if I can check one box that gets me out of the initial pile into the, well, let's actually read this pile, I'm good. I will happily do it. Because I've been involved in AFP for years. Actually, my chapter president this year, which is not really what I was planning to do, but things happen. And I think I was vice president of professional development part of last year. I became president-elect because our sitting president-elect stepped off the board to become chapter administrator. So everyone was, oh, well, you were going to be president someday. I was like, not really. 2022 was not my year. I was going to keep doing professional development and stay in the background. But we're happy to serve the chapter and try to keep our members engaged and all those things AFP wants you to do. But at the Historic House Museum, I was director of major gifts and planned giving, which is a misnomer at best. I still say to most people I was really director of development because I was responsible for major gifts, planned giving, our annual, like the two big mailed appeals, and it was a very small team, so there wasn't a lot of, oh hey, you take this on while I go meet with this major gift prospect. But good experience nonetheless. I think helped increase their culture of philanthropy, even got employee giving to increase, which I don't know if I certainly don't think I can take full credit for. I like to think I helped, if nothing else. But yeah, then came to the Conservancy 2 months before the pandemic started, and assuming life was going to be smooth, and somehow it has not been, but we've been able to make it. In spite of all that, we closed on a multi-million-dollar capital project to purchase, 205 acres that were formerly a golf course within the boundaries of the national park that we're in the process of working through to sell. 205, 190 acres are going to be sold to the national park, and the Conservancy is going to retain 15 to help develop visitor amenities and other things, where the Park Service was very clear that it will be a years-long process and vendors and all sorts of things. Like, why don't you all just do it? And we know you know what you're doing. So it's a very interesting time to be here. One of the attractive things about the job was really coming in when knowing that capital campaign was sort of underway, mostly quiet when I started on the team. But I have no real complaints. It's really a great team. I think in 15 years, it's really the first position I've been in where there are enough people to actually do all the work that, it's never all, most of the work that we really want to get done, and it is really the highest priority. So I feel very, very lucky to be in that position, even 15 years into the field.
Daniel, you talk about many places. What kind of annual budgets did you have at all of these environmental organizations, or at least supporting environmental organizations? And what were your teams like, if you had any?
At the music school settlement, I was annual fund. There was a grant writer, a communications person, and a director. So for the budget of the music pop quiz, that was between 2 and 3 million, I think, because we had a really big faculty, and they still do, because they do a lot of programming in New York City schools where they lost their arts funding. And then so the money we raise helps support teaching artists that go in to provide that learning that they otherwise would not be able to have. International House, I was one of 3 assistant directors, a director, a database person, and a development assistant. At the Historic House Museum, me, the membership person, and our boss were the only development staff. She also had marketing reporting to her. And now, oh dear, I report to my vice president of philanthropy, research and operations manager, operations coordinator, who are really our database people, communications person, grant writer. We share an event manager with our our special events team and the marketing department. Leaving somebody out. It's usually, I think, 7. I have 7 direct reports, and then I report to my vice president. So, but this year is our largest budget we've ever had, and we are just over $7 million. But pre-pandemic, we were more like about between 4 and 5.
Oh, wow. So what are you seeing the biggest challenges, both like when you first started and now in the environmental sector? in fundraising?
Well, things are much different in January of 2020, not knowing what was coming in March. I think in January, it was really just trying to get in front of as many people as possible, just to introduce myself, because our previous chief development officer had been here for a decade, and before that, he had been superintendent of the park. So he's beloved, mercifully is still alive, and a great proud ambassador for the work we're doing, but just is not here in the office with us. So a lot of it is just trying to get introduced in place of this institution that everyone knows. And really, since the onset of the pandemic, it has been pivoting, which I'm sure none of you have had to pivot. I'm sure everything has just been smooth sailing like always. But trying to figure out how to keep people engaged and connected to the work. I have the benefit of the national park, so getting people out for hikes it was probably, I feel like probably September or October of 20 before people were more comfortable at least being outside, even still masked for a hike or whatever. And particularly because of the shutdown orders across the country, parks were one of the few things that were still open. So I mean, we experienced a huge jump in visitation. Our visitations normally, pre-pandemic, we were hovering right around 2 million, and the estimates for 2020 were at least 2.8 million, which is a pretty big uptick for us. We know there was a point, probably that first summer, where trailheads, literally people were parking illegally in trailheads just because they wanted to get out in the park. They're like, oh, well, I don't see a spot, but this looks like one. What could go wrong? So all the park rangers and law enforcement had some very interesting stories of, well, I have to give you a ticket. This isn't even like, you're not even in the parking lot. What is this? But no, I think the success of closing that big deal on the golf course was really, I wasn't sure we were going to be able to make it happen in time, but our vice president, my boss, we were out hiking that property. Oh God, I feel like that's probably the part of the park that I now know best, even though it's not yet part of the park, because it's a very beautiful property, but I really only knew it as something I drove past in my old job and was like, oh, that doesn't look like a golf course. Oh, okay, moving along. But no, getting the bulk of the donors who supported that project out for a hike to actually see the property for themselves, really hear at least some of what we were initially thinking of what things we could do with it. Once the park owns their portion and we keep ours, some of those visitor amenities, a lot of things that for us, adding additional trails, which is always of interest for the hikers. Part of it runs up against the Cuyahoga River. So there's also thoughts of either a new kayak or canoeing launch. Part of the Cuyahoga Valley Scenic Railroad runs through it. So could we have a stop there for people to have more access to the property? Possibility for a bridge to the towpath trail that's across the river. So there's a lot of opportunity, but it really relied on people being able to get out and see it. So I think we were lucky in being the kind of organization we are, because we wouldn't have had the same. It's hard to have the same argument when you're doing it. Where in my previous job at Historic House Museum, where you usually have to be inside to see what's happening in the manor house to explain, oh, we're restoring this part of it back to what it was like when the family lived here, or oh, we're changing this garden to better reflect what actually happened when the family was in residence. So I think the biggest change I'd see is really looking for direct impact, because we're just about to have a kickoff celebration for what we're calling our Trails Now Fund, because we're doing a number of projects. Really, after we were able to secure the golf course property, really we're turning our attention back to kind of immediate needs in the park. Thought focusing on investing in the trails, particularly maintenance, improvements, upgrades, because so many more people have been using them. So we have, oh dear, on the Trails Now Fund, we've got multiple big projects. Stanford Trailhead is probably more than $1 million project, but we have a $500,000 match from the National Park Service. It's going to be creating a new trailhead that really will be a gateway for hiking, horseback riding, biking in that portion of the national park. We're in the second year of improvements to bridle hiking trails, so where you can do everything other than ride a bike, but you can ride a horse on those trails. We have a $100,000 match from a former board member and his wife for those improvements. And then, oh dear. Oh, the last pedestrian footbridge that the park prioritized last year that needs to be replaced. It's about $32,000 or $33,000 project. But we raised the money for the addition they gave us a list of 5 bridges. We're down to the 5th bridge this year. All the rest were able to get funded last year. So those are all very big things that are happening that require large sums of money that we're kind of tying under this big umbrella of Trails Now, because there's an endowed fund that our previous chief development officer started, they call Trails Forever, that really is about ideally creating a $10 million endowment that will, and when we have reached that milestone years from now, we'll ideally spend off about $500,000 a year to support improvements for trails throughout the park. But we have been de-emphasizing that just because it is, for one, all the income just passes through us. We don't get a piece of that action as that income is generated. But really, we've seen just among our own donor community that people really are interested in seeing, like, oh, I had a major donor couple give $10,000 because we did a hike and we were able to show them one of those bridges that needs to be replaced, and like, this is where the Park Service has already had to come in and reinforce it. The wall, the placement on the river is good, but has been worn away just by regular use and because of the climate. And we see this need here, and they love hiking, and we're happy to do a $10,000 gift. But those kinds of things are becoming more prevalent, I think, for us. Be able to really show the donors the direct impact they can make with their dollars, rather than just saying, oh, let's just keep building this endowment. So it's been working thus far. I'm keeping everything crossed it continues to work, because we've got some ambitious goals.
Danielle, how do you engage and connect with people, whether it's cultivation and stewardship? And some of those, you could, whether you want to go from best practices or bloopers you've had, whichever.
Oh my, okay. For us, it helps. This will be the first calendar year where we're going to have all 3 of our normal normal special event fundraisers in person. In 2020, in the fall, we normally would have what we call the Clam Bake, that usually supports our environmental education center. We certainly had no intentions of doing that in 2020, but a number of donors came to us and said, we will happily give you money. We really just need to get out of the house. We said, okay. So we came up with basically an abridged special event, really where people could come pick up their meals. We had staff, everybody masked and everything, put something in your trunk, and we called it Picnic in Your Park. We were encouraging people to take their baskets and go enjoy the park somewhere, and be socially distanced and all of that. But so certainly nothing like the events we were used to doing with hundreds of people under a big tent, which was, a very successful event. We just, another one of those pivot points, because you're saying, oh, well, what can we do how can we put the meals together in such a way that it'll be interesting, it'll be enough food, and all of this, what price point based on what we normally charge for the event tickets. Most people kind of drove in, said hello, took their food and disappeared into the park or went home and ate it on their back patio. But I think for us really getting back to having those events, because that's where a lot of the cultivation and stewardship happens, in spite of really, I think really regardless of if some of those people are sponsors of that specific event. And looking for opportunities where it doesn't necessarily have to be a big production. I finally gotten, in the last 6 months, really gotten back to inviting planned giving donors or major donors in my portfolio out just for lunch or coffee, a walk in the park, and it being less of a, oh God, I haven't left my house in a year. No, let's just do another Zoom. I think people are, at least here in this part of Ohio, I can't speak for the whole state, seem to feel more comfortable, especially if they've had their vaccinations and have done what they're supposed to do. No big bloopers in this job. I can give you a comical site visit, a foundation site visit story from my last job. They've been supporting the museum and the estate for years. I mean, they made a massive investment in the play garden, which was probably a $500,000 project to create more space, more family-friendly space, particularly for kids. So we had the board of this foundation out really to do kind of a tour of the property. We had lunch. I think we had lunch out and then came and toured the property. But it had been like pouring rain the whole week prior, but it was reasonably clear that day. My boss, in her infinite wisdom, decided we would go. There's a part of, I know you're not familiar with this museum and it's fine, but the grounds, they're what we call tea houses. And on one side, it's kind of the ground is way up. On the other side, it's kind of a valley in front of it. She decided to take them into this valley portion, which we all could see was very wet, and got our little not a go-kart, but our golf cart stuck in the mud. And like, oh, well, damn, hop out, see if you can push it. And of course, she's got on her lovely, fancy high heels and floored it. And of course, I'm in my suit and I get halfway covered in mud, which is very good comedy. And if nothing else, has been a wonderful way for whenever I engage with those trustees to, we were just talking about that site visit. Because I actually reached out to them after I started this job. I was like, hello. Oh my God, we were talking about you a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, oh good, I'm glad it's still fresh. They ended up not supporting the project we proposed here in my current position, but they continue to be very supportive for Stan Hewitt Hall and Gardens, which is good. So it can go sideways quickly, no matter how well you prepare. But we were nimble. We finally were able to get the superintendent of the property came and helped get it out of the mud. And we continued with their tour, and I was able to get wiped off and keep on going because we still had a tour of the manor house, and we're pointing out interesting things that had changed since they had last visited. But no, I think it's a lot of it is just trying to capitalize on those opportunities to get in front of those people, even if it still has to be virtual. It's better to have the contact than nothing at all. Ideally, especially if they're longtime supporters, they really want to know what has been successful, how they can make an impact.
Daniel, in your annual fund, what tools and messaging do you incorporate currently?
Oh my, we've been going back and forth, but I think in the last year, especially as public programs have been able to come back, our education center has only been reopened now for another week or so. As more of those messages, really we're trying to integrate here's what we're doing now, and here's what we've been able to do with your past support, which I know everybody is doing. But I think for us, particularly changing, kind of varying the way we deliver that message. So our most recent calendar year end appeal, we decided to go with basically a photo heavy, I think, trifold piece rather than the standard 1 to 1.5 page letter from the executive director. This is what we've done this year. This is where we're going next year. We need your support. We need you to renew your support. And really saw probably the best response we've ever had to that photo heavy piece that was very limited language, simple copy about these are kind of the big areas of work that we continue to be moving forward on. This is what we see coming for 2022. But yeah, I think I was pleasantly surprised at the response to the simpler, more image heavy piece. Then going with the old standby that always produced the letter, the letter maybe with 1 or 2 photos.
So you noticed that the response was higher. Was the dollar amount higher too? And was there anything else that you noticed in the when you analyzed?
Yeah, it was the percentage response was up and dollars raised was substantially up. I mean, our December for us, December is our largest revenue month, as most of you can relate. I mean, we were probably, if I remember my budget correctly, I think we budgeted for like $310,000 or $320,000 in revenue. The appeal ended up generating $350 or $360, which is a pretty big jump in 1 month for us. No matter what we're doing. And we're in the first round of budgeting now for the next fiscal year because we're September to August. So I've been knee deep in those figures, trying to make sense of, okay, this is what we accomplished, but make sure you also pull out like, oh, these major donors made a prepayment on their annual fund pledge. So that money is not going to repeat in September. So pull that out and tell finance, don't expect me to be $50,000 over goal again. That is not going to be a thing. So stop. Read my budget. I've explained to you why there's all these variations. And for us, actually, tribute giving has actually gone pretty far up. And I think some of it because the people who have passed throughout the pandemic were people that were committed to our mission and were deeply engaged for 30 or more years. But some of it, I think I feel like at least in our donor base, have been more likely to actually make a gift in someone's honor when that's what's in the obituary versus in years past. I think especially because when you couldn't go to a funeral to actually say goodbye to someone or you may be more likely to say, oh, I'll send $50 to the Conservancy in his name because why not? And I know it was important to him. We heard about it all the time. I'm interested to see if that trend continues, but that has also been another hurdle for me in budgeting, being to say, oh, well, if I had my crystal ball that was going to tell me when another former board chair, former event chair is going to unfortunately die, and then say, oh, do we think it's going to be $10,000 for them? Like, I'd rather just pull it all out and say, I cannot budget for this, just like I cannot budget for a planned gift. But because I would much rather have all my major donors and all the Legacy Society members live another 50 years because they're all good donors. Then I'd say, oh, okay, change the budget again. Oh, these two are gone, so we're gonna have a $15,000 decrease in operating revenue, and we're gonna lose these sponsorships because we don't know if their family's gonna continue because family foundation guidelines change at what feels like a whim. So no, I think more things for you all to be considering. I'll be interested to hear if any of these things have resonated for you over the last 2 years as well.
Daniel, you talked about an event that picnicked in the park.
Mhm.
In the past, did that bring the same quantity in terms of people out to the event? Did it raise the same amount of funds? And were you able to do any continued stewardship activities with that? Or was it not at all like you've done in the past?
It was nothing like the clam bake that we normally have at that time, because that really is, yeah, I mean, it's as with most special events, if it's not an in-person event, it's totally different, or kind of in passing, hello, thanks for the meal, see you later. It was not, the way we really set it up was so that we expected there to be lines as people were waiting to get into the Environmental Ed Center campus. So we actually had musicians kind of on the long driveway. Then our CEO, the superintendent of the national park, were all kind of poised to greet each car as they came in. Some people ended up pulling off into a parking space because they wanted to have a conversation with someone who they haven't seen in almost a year, even if everyone has their masks on and we're being safe. But it was still different. The revenue was all general operating. It was not tied to the Environmental Ed Center because the Park Service closed that campus when the pandemic began, and they only reopened it 2 weeks ago. They decided to basically get caught up in all the deferred maintenance because pre-pandemic we were serving between 10 and 11,000 students every year on the campus, and post-programming, there was only a week, maybe two, between academic year programming and going right into the summer. So there was never enough time to say, okay, we've been trying to replace windows the last 3 years. We're replacing all the windows that need it now. We're doing all the painting that needs to be done now. Any renovations of spaces that needs to happen, it's happening now. And then when we reopen, everything is in pristine condition. We desperately hope it stays that way for maybe 2 years, because we don't know when we're going to be able to do a full shutdown and get everything done again like they just did. So as far as stewardship, a lot of it was really coming back to that kind of ongoing impact. How are you keeping the Conservancy and the park going? Because we at the beginning, well, not the beginning, because we got a PPP loan. But after that ran out, we went from a staff of 70, 80 to about 25. Because the Environmental Ed Center was closed, so all the teaching staff, everyone there was gone. Everyone in our special event staff was gone because we obviously were not holding all the weddings we had booked. We were not holding in the same way. We pivoted that business into, oh dear, they were pocket weddings or something like that, where you could have, including your men, including your officiant, I think we could have 10 people. So we ended up doing a number of those for people that, rather than kicking the can into 2021 or 2022, hoping things got better, that said, I'll just save the money. And it's going to be a tiny wedding. If we have a reception, it will all be distant somewhere that's not, only a handful of people I think do them here in the park. But it was really about, in that first year, trying to just keep the Conservancy going more than anything else. And by 2021, we were able to talk more about the golf course and get that money raised, start really at least talking more about how are we responding to the pandemic, but the kind of the transitions we see coming with our environmental education program, being able to have volunteers back in the national park, some of those kind of, how are we getting through it, and how is your support helping make that happen, than just in the, okay, we're still in the, can we just keep the doors open phase.
Any questions for Daniel? I leave the floor open to others who may have heard something he said and want to either expand upon, or you have another question for him.
Nothing yet. Okay.
Daniel, what do you see for the future?
Oh my, I really need a crystal ball.
How did you create your fundraising plan this year? Any strategies? Maybe we'll go with that.
A lot of it is relying on things that were successful in the last 2 years. We've been probably since the middle of 2020, we've been doing quarterly, what we call fireside chats that we do on Zoom with usually our CEO and then kind of guest speaker, guest presenter, depending upon the topic. And we actually, we have a still reasonably new superintendent of the park. So we did one with her, just kind of I think before she became, I think she was still acting superintendent at the time, but everyone still wants to see and hear from the leader of the park, which is important. We've done one, we did one, I think, around volunteer projects that were happening kind of even at a distance, as we were only allowed to have kind of much smaller numbers of volunteers back in the park. It's really, we've been using it as an opportunity to keep the major donors, the members of the Legacy Society, lifetime donors, because I think our Lifetime Society is for anyone who's given $100,000 or more in their lifetime, and then slowly starting to integrate some of the corporate partners, just to let them see a little more behind the scenes, what is actually happening at the park that may not have made the last issue of the magazine, may not be something we're shouting from the rooftops yet, but it's still interesting and something they may not know we do. So I would encourage you all to try that, because I think across the board, integrating more of the virtual options for things, because the in-person is very important, just to be able to say, hello, I'm the fundraiser. Tell me about yourself, donor. Why have you been giving for 20 years? But if you can leverage the virtual to be able to reach people and provide experiences that may have been something you could really only do on a much smaller scale, provide that access if someone is really, we're a national park, so there are a million kind of stakeholders, as I say, whether it's the birders, the hikers, the joggers, people with kids, people that love our concert series, people that love the lectures that we have in the park. Kind of being able to meet as many of those people where they are. And if it may, rather than saying, oh, we're bringing everything back, nothing's virtual again, and not necessarily getting as robust of a response. I think sticking with something, keeping some things virtual keeps more people, I hope, engaged. And is another opportunity to then follow up and say, oh, you registered, but you couldn't come. What's going on? Are you okay? Or, oh, how did you like the last speaker? I know you're a birder, so, did you read their book? And they're creating things like that, where you can also create opportunities for the follow-up or a check-in call. And those are literally zero cost to us other than time and getting a speaker either from the park or on our staff reserved. So things like that. I love to have in the fundraising plan because there's no budget impact, at least on the expense side. Looking critically at your special events, because I know, having inherited one and not knowing I was going to, it's kind of my entry into the field. I understand that special events have their place. I also understand, especially now, we all have to be the best possible stewards of the resources we have. So if you have a special event that's, we've been doing it for 20 years, is it actually profitable? Is it meeting the goals that are most important for your work and your mission and the organization? Not just, so-and-so donor started it 20 years ago and they're now dead and we've continued doing it because that's what they wanted to do, versus what are the numbers actually telling you? Is it profitable? Is it worth the time? Is it worth everyone's time? Is it worth the money for increasing costs of food to entertain people, tent rentals, tables, whatever, entertainment, all of that? Is it actually providing the return you need? Because I will be interested after this full calendar year, having now finally seen all of our special events happen in person. I will finally, I've been keeping my comments and, oh, maybe this should change, really to myself, because since I haven't really had a normal year yet, but this will be at least a normal year when it comes to the special events. That is certainly our expectation, to be able to say, okay, well, should the ticket price increase? When did it last increase? And was the event committee actually valuable? We had all these meetings, but all they did was sell, between the committee members, they sold 100 tickets for a 400-person event. Okay, do we need new people on the committee, or do we just not need a committee anymore, and we can all save an hour every 3 weeks and spend that time finding 5 new sponsors to make this event more profitable? Those kinds of things, because it's an interesting experience I had, also budget related. Really, as probably in the April or May of 2020, I was charged with making cuts to our department budget. And I said, well, I didn't make this budget, so I wasn't flying blind. I was flying more blind, certainly, than I am now, working on budgets 2 years into the organization and having a much better understanding of the process. And the previous chief development officer had already announced his retirement, so he was not very engaged in the budget process. So there was certainly some fiction, some padding that I found that made it easy to make cuts, but there was a lot of consultation with other members of the team and my boss saying, I've seen this event in the files, but I don't think they've done it in 3 years. And so I was like, oh yeah, we haven't done that in years. That can go. I'm like, oh, well, that's $1,000 I can take. That doesn't bother anybody. Great, I will take that. That also allowed me to get immediately got a better feel for, okay, what are we really spending the money on? At least what was the plan pre-pandemic? And how can we adjust? Can we hold on to some of those dollars and say, oh, well, we're not going to do these 2 cultivation events, but let's do this thing on Zoom, or let's do this mailing around the Environmental Ed Center so that previous donors and funders understand how we've begun transitioning things virtually, because education in a national park usually relies on you being in the national park, not on video. So kind of making that pitch, without necessarily saying, give more money today, but at least saying, here's what we're doing to meet people where they are. I don't know. I feel like my crystal ball is probably cloudy after that.
Denise has a question. Feel free, Denise. Thank you, Dan.
Sure.
Sure. Hi, Dan. Coming from a park setting as well, one of the challenges I find is finding those new donors. A lot of our donors are one-off. We have a program, or we have a memorial, or we have something, and they come in and they say, yeah, I'm going to donate to this memorial tree for this person. And then, that's it. So you talked a lot about, keeping your current donors engaged, but I'm wondering how you get your new donors, where you create that list and that contact.
That's a very good question. A point I forgot to put in my notes to cover. We've been working with our primary print vendor really to do, for what, as far as we know, is the first time in the Conservancy's history, annual member acquisition mailings. And we've really been looking specifically at groups around, kind of in the perimeter communities that surround the national park, because we're 33,000 acres. We are geographically situated basically almost exactly between Cleveland in the north and Akron in the south. And so we are one of few organizations, I think, in the region that are able to pull on donor support from both of those communities. So we really have been trying to be thoughtful, reasonably data-driven, and not just saying, oh, well, just give me a list of everybody in the state who makes more than $100,000. We really have been focusing in perimeter communities where we know it's kind of the highest propensity of people who would be coming into the national park because it's either within quick walking or even quicker driving distance, or riding or hiking. But also looking, one of the kind of a long-term goal of my own is because the national park, because we have people who come and do weddings, because we have venues for corporate meetings, for life celebrations, any number of things, really looking at how we can better integrate our prospecting work with what those other business units are doing. Be able to, and because the park's 50th anniversary is coming in 2024, there's a million crazy, ridiculous, some expensive ideas in my head of, oh, we should do this, and oh, why can't we get this group? But like people that have been married in the national park, even though I know we don't have great records of our own as a conservancy on who did that, that could be something that's part of the 50th anniversary, or kind of the lead up to it, to say, okay, throughout 2023, some intentional marketing online, but also in our own print publications, but probably it needs to be some, at least in the major papers and media around here. Did you get married in the national park? Did you celebrate a birthday? Whatever. Go to this website, tell us your story. Because, and not necessarily, I mean, certainly to solicit them for a gift, but also to better identify when opportunities come up that, oh, one of those event spaces needs to be renovated. Oh, well, now we have a list of 500 couples that got married in that space that we can go back to and say, oh, you made this, the national park is a part of your life and love story. This space is due for renovation. I certainly, it would be nice if whatever the price tag is, that those people could ideally cover the bulk of what we need. But even if it's just more for awareness, but also to kind of build upon the connection they have with the park, be able to include them in that way. So look, I mean, the thing I've always done in my, not so long, but the many years to go fundraising career is where are those, where not necessarily low hanging fruit, but where are those people that are connected, but where it may not necessarily be documented? And are there ways to kind of work around that? Kind of increasing the likely donor pool, even if you don't have all of the information in your own database or kind of easily at your disposal. How can you bring those people in the fold and make them feel appreciated, so that when they get an annual fund solicitation, they actually say, oh, well, we got married there 25 years ago. Why did we let our membership lapse 10 years ago? We should be members. Okay, we're coming back. Or, oh, they're doing this renovation project near where we got married. We should send $1,000 for that. Building those connections, because if you're not communicating, they don't know. That's the problem. It would be much easier if everyone just, if they all followed us on Facebook, if they all actually read all of our posts, if they read the magazines and newsletters when we produced them and mailed them at increasing postal rates. But yeah, it's unfortunately and fortunately for us, because if the work wasn't challenging, if it was just shooting fish in a barrel, it would just be too easy for us, I suppose. It certainly keeps us on our toes to have to try to figure out how to reach these people in different ways, kind of tell some of the same stories, but in a different way so that they actually get it. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Are there any last questions for Daniel? Thank you, Daniel, for joining us today and sharing. Oh, Erica, please. Oh, yay! Yes, a big round of applause for Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today. And we appreciate you chatting, especially about your experiences at fundraising in the environment.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you for the invitation. And you have all my contact information. So if anyone wants to reach out by email or LinkedIn, please be in touch. I'm happy to help if I can.
Thank you.